Oh, it's showtime. Welcome back, everyone. Once again, we have a live program with an incredible guest today, Benjamin Gordon. We'll get to Ben in a minute. Of course, we'll also be joined by our special correspondents throughout our time together. And we'll have the opportunity for you to ask questions of Benjamin or myself. First of all, thank you so much for being here. It has been such an interesting couple of months. We started off by doing an interview with Judge Rosemary Aquilina, the sitting judge in Ingham County. Great conversation, and that gave us the catalyst to keep going. The comments and the feedback that I've had from all of you have made this thing possible, which has now made it into a podcast. We take our recordings, we use the magic of the computer, and turn that into a podcast. You can find Armchair Attorney and all of the guests we've interviewed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also find the full versions of these interviews on YouTube. They're also on LinkedIn, but LinkedIn is kind of hard to search through. Now, before we get to Ben, let's talk about some really interesting news. I have a few things. First of all, non-competes are back in the news, mostly because I keep talking about them and how I dislike them. What I'll talk about briefly on non-competition agreements, dozens of people reach out to me and talk to me about their experience with non-competition agreements and how these non-competition agreements have impacted their lives, made it difficult to find jobs, and given them enormous amounts of stress. We are going to continue to talk about non-competes, but we're also going to be looking to make some big changes. Follow along next week, and we'll talk a lot more about non-competition agreements. Now, another little bit of information. I wasn't quite sure how to approach this one, but I figured I wanted to be ready in case any of you had questions. So there was a release of an affidavit today, and that was brand new news out of a search warrant of Mar-a-Lago from former President Donald Trump. For me, I had to make sure that if you all asked me questions, I would have enough information to be able to tell you about it. So I printed it off. And when I printed it off, it was 38 pages. Now, I only read things typically when they're printed out. And I didn't know if I was going to have time. Fortunately, or unfortunately, most of it's redacted. Probably about like 60 to 80% redacted. So there's not a lot of really breaking news I can share as it relates to this document. So for now, we'll move on to something different. The next thing I want to talk about, again, is a little bit of personal stuff. I've taken a role with Epica Fleet Services. I am so excited to bring maintenance and repair back into my wheelhouse. I love the business. And this week is just about finishing up Brake Safety Week. Brake Safety Week started on August 21st and goes to the 27th, maybe 28th. I think it's 27th. Last year for Brake Safety Week, 35,000 commercial vehicles were inspected. 12% failed. 12% did not have adequate braking mechanisms and systems in order to satisfy the Department of Transportation. This is something that we don't talk nearly enough about when it comes to safely delivering freight on time and undamaged. You need better maintenance practices. So let's keep an eye on Brake Safety Week. Finally, there was a little bit of sad news, and this is what will dovetail into my conversation with Ben here in just a moment. A nuclear power plant in the Ukraine went off the grid. And in order to keep it running, they had to get the backup generators to keep giving it power so it can continue to cool the system. This is terrifying. Nuclear proliferation is something that I am very, very, very much against. And nuclear power plants are generally very safe and sustainable ways to generate electricity in a non-war zone. Or if there's a massive tsunami and hurricane or earthquakes or any of those things. But nuclear power is a really good energy source. And this is a really frightening thing because if you can't keep these things cool, catastrophic things can happen. The conflict in Ukraine is horrifying. Thousands of civilians have died. Thousands of civilians have been injured and millions of people have fled that area. And we'll talk about Ben's work in that field in just a moment. But I will say this. Ukraine is one of the few countries that has ever existed to voluntarily give up their nuclear weapons. Following the fall of the Soviet Union, they made a deal. And that deals to have integrity around their borders and be protected from further aggression. Unfortunately, that was not honored by the Russians. And we'll talk about that impact and some of Ben's travels recently in just a moment. But let's set the stage. I met Benjamin Gordon through the powers of LinkedIn. He is a thought leader that I have been following for some time. His acquisitions and his history and his business have always been incredibly compelling to me. And I knew for this audience, man, you would get so much out of getting to know Ben Gordon a little bit better. So without further ado, let me add Benjamin Gordon.
Matthew, great to see you. Thanks so much for having me.
I am so excited to have you on the program, Ben. As I mentioned just a second ago, I have been following your career for such a long time. Can you give our audience a little bit of a history of what you've been doing in the space and what some of your recent stuff you've been working on?
Well, absolutely. So first of all, thank you, Matthew. And I've followed your successes, and great to be a part of your current success here, hopefully.
Thank you, sir. Absolutely. This is going great.
So my journey. So I'm a logistics guy, and I grew up in the logistics industry. I actually had a family business. My grandfather started a truck leasing and logistics company called AMI, and his grandfather started a horse and buggy business in 1903 called Morgenstern Express. So I'm basically fifth generation in this crazy industry, and that's my excuse. If people ask what the hell am I doing here, it's a long line of people in the family here, and so that's how I ended up in this world.
And what I love about that is like, this is the story of so many people that we have talked to on the program so far. So myself, my grandfather had a grain hauling company, and then my father became a mechanic and eventually went to work for Roadway. So once you're in the supply chain, you really can't get out of it, right?
Well, I think that's right. Maybe we're all missing a chromosome or two, but yes, I think that's exactly right.
Well, like you can't opt out of supply chain. Like, it is the thing that unites everything. Everything comes on a truck. So what got you in your own career to get into logistics and transportation?
Yeah, so a turning point for me. So I graduated from college in 1995, and I thought, do I want to go into my family transportation business? No, I want to do things my way. And who knows, maybe I'll go back, but I want to chart my own course. So I went into strategy consulting at a Bain spinoff called CDI, but I looked for projects in transportation. And so a couple of years in, I got the opportunity to work with Extra, the trailer leasing company, among others. So you remember them, and it was fun. And I actually worked with Extra and said, wouldn't it be great if you could migrate from trailer leasing into this new thing called 3PL? And they said, what's that? And I said, well, there's a company that went public recently called Hub Group and another one called CH Robinson. You ought to look at them and you ought to buy them. And we actually had a board meeting about this. It's been 25 years, so I can talk. I think the NDA is expired now, right? And so we talked about it, and they said, hey, this 3PL thing sounds great, but we're going to focus on truck leasing, trailer leasing, because we know that, and we think that's where it is. Yeah. You could have bought Hub Group and CH Robinson back then for, I think, $500 million, and so clearly would have been great. But guess what? That's what happens when you're a consultant. You give advice, and then maybe you do it, maybe you don't do it. So
they ignore you.
Yeah, I'd rather be the guy who does it, and that's what led me to start my first company.
That's amazing. So just to paint the picture for our folks watching or listening right now, Extra Lease is the largest trailer leasing company in North America. They are owned by Berkshire Hathaway with over 100,000 pieces of trailing equipment. And who are Extra Lease's customers? The biggest companies on the planet: Walmart, UPS, FedEx, Amazon. The need for trailers and the innovation for trailers is astonishing. I'm going to ask you about a thing I read recently. Maybe you can give me some more insight. So there's a company called Freightvana, and they do a deal with Wabash, and they get access to trailers. You have Uber, who's a trucking freight company, all that, and they get their Power Loop, their trailer pool. Then you have Convoy with Convoy Go. The smartest people in the room are talking about trailers. Is this a hallmark from Benjamin Gordon from 20 years ago?
I think it tells you that sometimes the more things change, the more they're the same, right? I mean, there's a need for assets. As much as those of us on the tech side like to value the tech, you can't underestimate the importance of the asset side too. And that's kind of what led me into my first business. So I ended up starting a company called Threeplex after business school, or actually while I was at business school. And the idea was, originally we were going to use the internet to fill the backhaul. Originally, I was going to help my grandfather's truck leasing company. I said, hey, we could use the internet to sell, freight and fill the backhaul. And he said, hey, that's great, but I'm selling my company. So I said, okay, good for you. And I started mine, and that was what would become Threeplex. And Threeplex was really what was today you would call a SaaS TMS, and one of the first of its type. Our main competition back then was a company that Mitch Wesley started that Oracle would end up buying. They had the Oracle TMS and Glog, and there were a handful of others, and we did okay. We raised 28 million, and we fought through the rise and fall of the markets, and ended up selling in 2002 to Maersk, who would then sell it to IBM. So I lived through that and did some things right and a lot of things wrong. Learned a ton from it, and decided, okay, I'm now a logistics guy. And I had all these logistics companies coming to me because we were selling a SaaS TMS to these 3PLs, and I realized that there was an opportunity to do so much more business in the 3PL arena. And so I ended up starting an investment bank, BG Strategic Advisors, and our first clients were 3PLs like NFI and UPS and Agility Logistics in Kuwait, and things took off from there.
So you started a company while still in school, right? That's Threeplex was in school. What in the world were you thinking? Like, I want to just have a lot more stress. I want to have a lot more pressure. Is that what it was missing for you in college? You wanted to do more?
Yeah, I have a lot of friends that ask me, am I a magnet for a glutton for punishment? And the answer apparently is yes. But look, here is my view, and it was pretty simple. I looked at other people that I thought were smart and successful, that I thought I could learn something from, and said, all right, why don't I see if I could do what that guy did in a field that I know more about? So it was 99, I was at Harvard Business School, and a guy named Dave Perry had founded a company the prior year called Chemdex. Chemdex became the very first B2B exchange in the e-commerce marketplace world.
Wow.
And he was focused on the chemical industry. And what did Dave Perry know about the internet? At the time, nothing. But he was a smart guy. He was a student of business, student of history. He'd worked at Exxon before. He understood the chemical side. And he said, hey, I could use the internet in order to automate these big, thick books that everybody in the chemical industry flips through in order to figure out, what should I buy? Procurement. And he said, well, I'll just put it online and automate it. And Dave did an amazing job, and backed by Kleiner, and went public, and within 2 years built a $10 billion value company, and so naturally a lot of people watched what Dave Perry did. I watched it and thought, well, I bet I could give this a shot in our industry in transportation. And so really that was the motivation for me. It was I don't claim that I had this unique idea that the internet could help automate an industrial industry. It was more about watching somebody else that succeeded and figuring out how can I borrow that.
Well, I like that story because it starts with you understanding the problem that your family had, moving freight from a place that wasn't profitable and finding loads and solving that problem. So you start with the problem that you understand, and you say, how can I take technology and fix that problem or address it in a different way? So it's absolutely fascinating to me. So after you saw the success here, you said, okay, well, now I want to have your own investment firm. Like, what was that transition like? Saying, okay, I ran a business, I did that piece. Now I'm going to run, I want to run multiple businesses? I want to have multiple headaches? Or what was the next path there?
Yeah. Well, I think when you start a company and you run a company, the highs are high, the lows are low. Entrepreneurs know that everything gets multiplied. And I like and it was great. And I'm happy that I did it. And I got to work with great people and learned a tremendous amount. But I thought, wouldn't it be great to have more of a portfolio approach? And if I built a merchant bank, providing advice on the one hand, and then investing capital on the other hand, I could work with lots of great companies. I could build a portfolio, and ultimately I could have more impact and more reach. And so BG Strategic Advisors started as an investment bank doing M&A in conjunction with other large companies like Agility Logistics, and then also at the time small companies that were growing rapidly like NFI, Genco, New Breed. These are all around $100 million-ish businesses when I first met them. And they scaled up and did tremendously well. NFI, Sid Brown and the Brown family built, it's now a $3 billion business. Genco, Herb Shear built that, now $1.4 billion business upon exit to FedEx. New Breed, Louis DeJoy was great to work with, grew that to over a $600 million business, then sold to XPO and is now our Postmaster General. So I got to work with some fantastic people. And what I found was I really loved working with great entrepreneurs, building great businesses. So we did a lot of M&A with those kinds of companies. And then I decided, well, I want to start investing in what could be the next NFI or the next New Breed or the next Genco.
Yeah.
And that's what led to starting Cambridge Capital and starting to invest in businesses in the space.
So what does Cambridge Capital do day to day? I know some of the companies you've worked with, like greenscreens.ai. What are some of the businesses that are part of your family of companies right now?
Right. So Cambridge Capital today has 7, but later today will become 8 portfolio companies, which is exciting news.
Yeah, could you please give us like the breaking news of that, but redact everything you need to redact so we can make sure that everyone's safe with the non-disclosure agreements?
Exactly. We just invested in a fantastic company called Blank. And
I've heard great things about Blank.
Yeah, exactly. Blank is fantastic. I do look forward to sharing with you more about that. It's an amazing company in the food logistics world. But coming back to
for everyone who's listening, follow Ben. Are you going to announce that today? Like, so later this afternoon, we'll see on your LinkedIn or your Twitter, hey, here's the big deal we've done, or is this going to be something we'll see Monday? What's the time?
We're going to close the deal today and we'll announce it next week, probably Monday or Tuesday. Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. See, we have breaking news here. It's just not totally broken yet. All right,
exactly.
So back to Cambridge Capital. So what are the companies what do you look for when you're making those investments?
So we look for great companies in supply chain that have the following elements. Number one is, thank you, Daniel. Go Team Blank. Number one, we look for companies that we think are leaders in different areas of supply chain. Could be anywhere in supply chain, ranging from, we've invested in companies in, well, you mentioned Greenscreens, that's AI to automate truck brokerage predictive pricing. Reverse logistics, like our company Reverse Logics, which is really the first end-to-end returns management system, kind of RMS. We've got tracking and visibility, like Parcel Perform, which has really got started in Europe and Asia, tracking visibility and post-purchase experience for e-commerce now in the US. Bring, a leader in last mile, now a unicorn, started in Israel, but majority of their business US and worldwide today. I'm leaving out a variety of others, but I'll just add also services companies like Everest, and we'll talk more about Everest as it relates to Ukraine, but it's really a fantastic tech-enabled truck brokerage company. But the thing that they all have in common is great businesses run by terrific founders in categories that have tailwinds, right, where there's good long-term growth supporting, as an example, the more e-commerce growth, the more there's need for fulfillment, like our company Bird in Europe, or the more need for last mile, like Bring and Delivery Circle and others, or tracking and visibility. So e-commerce is one of those mega trends. Technology to help automate more of supply chains, a mega trend. Convergence of digital and analog and logistics as you automate more and more. So these are all great areas with tailwinds. Next, we're looking for companies from a size standpoint. If they're tech, they're usually in the $5 to $30 million revenue range. Or if they're services, they're 5 to 30 million of EBITDA. We're flexible on whether it's majority or minority, but it's always in partnership with management.
Yeah.
We've never bought 100% of a company for the simple reason that we're partnering with existing teams. So if we're partnering with them, we want them to have lots of upside.
Absolutely. Well, actually, Ben, I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to kick you out just for a moment. Everybody, I'm excited to bring my very special correspondent back into the studio. Today's a very special day. Abby, how are you?
Hello, I am great. How are you, Matthew?
I gotta take a moment. Okay, we gotta skip the update on The Bachelorette. We have Ben Gordon here. I don't know if you've been watching, but he's here, and I want to try to see if we can pitch him some ideas. See if we can get him to go, wow, that's the kind of idea. So I'm gonna just spitball some ideas. People in the comments, you can let me know if you think these are good. Here we go. Here's my first one. Freight therapy. It is a personal therapist for every single freight broker. What do you think?
Yes, needed.
Okay. Okay, next one. Dog clogs, clogs for dogs. Now your dogs can also have clogs. Wooden shoes for dogs seems to be really what people are looking for. What do you think? Is that a good one?
How do these clogs stay on is the real question.
That's
Because I've tried to put the little boots on.
Ben's not going to invest in dog clogs. He's not going to do that. I have the solution. Here's my real pitch. Here it is.
Okay.
The paper truck. Think of a suburban Cintas, mobile service truck coming to your house with paper products, paper towels, toilet paper, printer paper. If you're working from home, here comes the assortment that you need to drive office efficiencies. The paper truck. What do you think?
I like it.
Do you have any ideas? What can we do? What else? What other things do you got? Give me something.
Would it be like a premium price for these paper products?
It's a subscription model, and you can actually use a corporate discount from your major company. So hey, I put this on XYZ company tab. I need my office supplies.
Okay. Is this a hub and spoke model, or are we going to have terminals with all these trucks?
Now you're asking the hard question. Ben's going to ask those questions too. Okay. That might not work then. That's a lot. I think I'm going to have to stick with dog clog. I think that's probably the best option here.
I like the name.
It's a very catchy name. Are there any news you can share with me, at least on The Bachelorette, as it relates to Hometown Week? Isn't that today? Isn't that this week?
Yes, they had hometowns. Yep. A couple of them went home. It's just a mess, honestly. All over the place.
How disappointing. Well, Abby, is there anything else you want to share with us before I go back to Ben and pitch him these ideas?
Nope. Let's do it.
All right, Abby, thank you for joining us. As always, great to have you from Sage Freight. What else people can know about Sage Freight? What do we need to know about Sage Freight?
We're hiring.
Really? Where out?
Yeah.
Is it remote?
Potentially for the right people.
Well, there you go, folks. If you're looking for a job in freight, talk to Abby Hufflepuff.
Reach out to me. Yeah, find me on LinkedIn. My last name's Haffenbrettel, but
you always use the wrong name. Half a pretzel is very good. All right, Abby, you gotta go. We'll be right back with Ben. I think we have a pretty good idea of the thing we're going to pitch him, but let's see how he reacts. Ben, how are you?
I'm fantastic.
I was just talking to my friend Abby, and I was thinking maybe we could pitch you an idea. What do you think?
Let's hear it.
So I'm thinking, we had a couple ideas. What about like wooden clogs for dogs? It's got a nice name. It's got a nice ring to it. What do you think about that?
I mean, I kind of like the paper. I was thinking like you could get the office to act it out for you.
I think you're right here. I think that I would love an adult kind of ice cream truck that brings to consumers like the thing that they need. Like you hear the little bell coming. Oh, there's the paper truck. There's the toilet paper. There's a paper towel. Cintas and Universe could pivot and start serving neighborhoods, I think.
I mean, there's a guy named Steve Carell who's in the transportation world. You could hire him.
You have to connect with him after the show. Now we'll make a transition. We've had a lot of fun here so far, but before we got on the air, we were talking about some of your travels and your work with Ukraine. And I would love to have you kind of tell the story for our viewers. Like, what have you been encountering? What did you do recently? And then what is the work that you do with Ukraine today?
All right. Well, it's interesting that you asked that question because today is the 1-year anniversary of the Cambridge Capital investment in a company called Everest Transportation. And Everest was and is an amazing company with amazing people. But one of the things that we loved about Everest last year was they had this brilliant model for using smart, talented offshore labor in Ukraine. And it meant that they could hire excellent people who are not going to get poached by the broker in Chicago across the street the next day, people who worked hard, great education, and also because the time zones could cover more of the 24 hours in the day. There are all kinds of advantages. So I went to Ukraine last August and September, had an amazing time, really came away impressed with the people of Everest and the people of Ukraine. And so you can imagine how devastating it was over the course of January and February to watch Putin and the Russian army mass troops along the border all around Ukraine. And we spent a lot of time with the team at Everest thinking about what to do. And of course, on February 24th, the unimaginable happened and Putin invaded really with an all-out attack on not just the army, but the people, the civilians throughout all of Ukraine. And there were days There were moments during those first 3 days when we all thought that Kyiv was going to fall, and the massacre of civilians could be on a scale that we hadn't seen since World War II, and we still worry about that. Luckily, the situation is less scary today than it was Feb 24, although it's still extremely scary, and I share your concerns about the risk of a nuclear disaster. But as it relates to Ukraine and Everest, February 24th was the longest day of the year, because on February 24th, Russia invaded. We knew the Everest team had 150 employees in and around Kyiv, and our number one obligation, my number one obligation just as a human, was we got to take care of these people. And so really round the clock effort that day and really the next 72 hours to get everybody out that we could. Some people didn't want to leave. Other people were willing to go to Western Ukraine. Others crossed the border into Poland. And that was a hellish time. But one great thing was people stepped up. My friend Brad Cohen, who started a nonprofit called Project Dynamo, evacuated Americans from Afghanistan last year. I reached out to Brad, and Brad and Project Dynamo were instrumental in helping us get lots of people out of Ukraine. We've gotten about 50 people out, Everest, employees, friends, family, but across the board, thousands of people with the help of Project Dynamo that have left, whether for Poland, Hungary, Romania, or otherwise. So that's been an all-consuming thing, and really that was 6 months and I guess 2 days ago that's occurred. So massive undertaking, still more to do. Thankfully, Ukraine today, the people of Ukraine as well as the people of Everest are in a much safer spot today than they appeared to be then, but there's still a lot more to do.
It's a fascinating bit of, we had the COVID outbreak, we had all these pressures on the supply chain, and then you have this hot war going on in Ukraine. And we saw in 2014 when Putin took over parts of the country, and we thought, well, maybe that would be enough. And the fear of NATO encroachment, the rationale behind a totalitarian is always what a totalitarian wants to do. And we saw the Russian ruble go plummeting. We saw all of these materials like fertilizers and different precious metals becoming more hard to obtain. And just the other day, I heard that Putin's looking to raise the army by another 137,000 people. What has this conflict done to the global supply chain from what you can see from your perspective?
Well, two things. I want to start small and specific and then move macro. I mean, first of all, clearly the impact on the people of Ukraine has been devastating. Mm-hmm. And as it relates to supply chains, things that Ukraine supplies like grain, and the ripple effects and billions of people at risk of starvation, particularly in Africa, a massive problem. We've had discussions with USAID about this and working on different ways to try to get grain out. And it looks like the port for now is open and ships are able to operate, but we'll see if that continues. So I think that's one. Two is ripple effects for adjacent areas like Eastern Europe. So earlier this month, I was in Poland, Germany, and Austria. We have logistics and technology portfolio companies in all of those places. And as we were visiting those companies, you couldn't help but notice, I mean, number one, the fear and the worry about where does Putin go next. There was also the fact that from a supply chain standpoint, the oil and gas shortages and Putin's threat to weaponize oil and gas, which is a huge contributor to the shock in terms of energy prices. Bad for us as Americans. It's worse for Europe because of Europe's dependence. Places like Germany, where the pipeline, Germany basically took their nuclear plants offline and went all in. And so the supply chain shocks on the energy side, enormous. And then look, third, this really has contributed to a 2-year period where we've had periodic shortages of everything, as you know, from toilet paper to chicken to semiconductor chips. And the boom bust cycles are exacerbated when you have these kinds of world crises. So one last thing on a very personal note, Ukraine, not just a supply chain crisis, but of course a very profound humanitarian crisis. We started a nonprofit, the Ukraine Logistics Coalition, and we have been actually using supply chain as a force for good. bringing in medical supplies, for example. We brought in over $20 million of medical supplies. And it makes a huge difference because we don't really know how many people have been killed. You and I have talked about this before, but the real number could be in excess of 20,000 people.
Wow.
But whatever the number is, one estimate that I've heard is that 60% of those deaths could have been prevented if you could quickly get first aid kits to people in the front lines. So buying and distributing first aid kits, you could buy a first aid kit for $180 from Israel appears to be market leader in this. India also has very good kits. There are other options as well. But you get those kits, push them onto the front line. We've got transportation partners that will do it for free. And if
That's awesome.
one kit, raises the likelihood of saving a life, I mean, $180 is a pretty unbelievably obvious thing to say yes to.
Is there a way? I'll make sure to put this in the show notes when we put this thing out onto the podcast and make it in other places. But to learn more about that, the coalition, Ukrainian, the Ukrainian Logistics Coalition, is that right?
The Ukraine Logistics Coalition, and the domain that you can go to logisticscoalition.org.
Okay, we'll make sure to put that in the show notes. I think that's a marvelous thing to think about. Is you very rarely can say how much life you can save with the amount of money you contribute to something. And this is the type of cause that first responders is the thing that prevents needless death. And we are seeing these conflicts hopefully begin to slow down. From your experience being there, does it feel like it's resolving, or does it feel like it's just continuing on that same trajectory?
Unfortunately, I think the latter. I don't think there's any, look, we have a lot of ties in the region. Our company Greenscreens AI, which is AI for predictive pricing and truck brokerage, great company, great technology. Our CEO, Don Salvucci Favir, is over there right now with the tech team. The tech team is in Vilnius, Lithuania, adjacent to Russia. A lot of the engineers are Russian, and they left. Now, they didn't leave just this month. They've left over the course of the last 2 to 4 years. There has been a brain drain of smart, talented Russian engineers that have moved out. But the point is, we know a lot of people in the region, and I see Daniel's posted the domain.
Yeah, throwing that up there on the screen.
The people that I talked to, and we met with a lot of people, whether in Krakow, Vienna, or Berlin. I don't know anybody that is optimistic that Putin all of a sudden is about to stop and pull out. I think it's likely to be a long, protracted, frozen conflict. And remember, I think he's betting on the fact that we in the West will lose patience and we'll move on to something else. And as energy prices are high or military costs continue to increase, I think he's banking on the fact that we will lose interest before he does. And unfortunately, that worked with him in the past. That's how Chechnya played out. And so unfortunately, I predict this is going to be a long, drawn-out conflict. But the opportunity for us, for you, for me, and for everybody that's watching, those of us who are professionals in the supply chain industry, there's a lot we can do to help. And using supply chain resources to be able to get more first aid kits into Ukraine is certainly one great example.
Absolutely. And what I think is so important for so many people to understand is that the Russian people aren't the ones who are the aggressors here. I mean, this is a dictator who has a desire to do very old kind of Cold War style things. And the enemy is not the Russian people. The enemy is this group of leaders. And hopefully they will lose trust in their fearless commander, Putin, and overthrow him or move on, because that may be the only way that this thing gets resolved in a reasonable time fashion. Because my goodness, no one needs more armed and hot conflicts in Eastern Europe. There's just no appetite for anybody. Now, Ben, I'm going to have to let you go again, just for a brief moment. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been having a great time talking to Benjamin Gordon about all sorts of things in our supply web, but now I'm joined by my very new special correspondent, Trey Griggs. Trey, can you hear me?
Matthew, hey. Yes, Matthew, can you hear me? Yeah.
I can hear you. I got to say, that shirt looks incredibly good on you.
Thank you. My wife does not agree, but I think it's wonderful.
I understand you have some breaking news for us. What can you tell me is going on?
Listen, I'm in Columbus, Ohio at the Nationwide Children's Hospital Championship on the Corn Ferry Tour. Now, what is the Corn Ferry Tour? It's a great question. I mean, the real question is, what's a corn ferry? I can tell you this. It's not a magical vegetable that creates success, because these guys out here on the tour are playing for nothing. They're just trying to get to the PGA Tour. Nothing's guaranteed. It's really hot out here. It's hard. You know, they got to play 4 rounds. I mean, this is one of the hardest jobs on the planet, Matthew. Listen, these guys have to walk, all right, like 6 miles a day on perfect grass
no, thank you.
and hit a golf ball. Like it's terrible.
Pass.
It's hard. One of the hardest jobs in the world. But they're out here. I've got some good friends. One of my neighbors, Chris Nagel, is here. Unfortunately, he's going to miss the cut this week. Had a rough week. My other good friend, Jared Wolf, he's 6 under, tied for 6th going into this round. He's had a bogey, a birdie, a double bogey, and an eagle already in 5 holes today. So it's a crazy day out here. The crowds are wild. In fact, I'm playing in the event, and I got to go hit my shot in a minute. There's also the FedEx Cup is on the PGA Tour, and you got Live Golf. These guys are making hundreds of millions of dollars, and they don't care. They're just out there smoking and drinking, having a good time. Who cares about that? But listen, I'm in the tournament. I took this break so that we could have this conversation. I've already been penalized.
I like that hat too. Is that Freight Vana, buddy?
Yeah. It is, buddy. And I've already been, they're one of my sponsors here out here on tour. I've already been penalized a couple of strokes because I'm not wearing pants. I'm not professional at all, but I got to go hit my shot here real quick. I did hit it in the yard. I hit it in the yard, unfortunately. This house, I don't know who this is. Hopefully it's not a big deal, but here we go. Let's see if we can get it out of here. All right. There we go. All right. Oh, no. Oh, that's the fountain. Oh, right in the fountain. Okay, well, listen, hey, great to talk to you, man. Pleasure to be on the show. For those golfers out there, make sure you get out and enjoy the weekend on the PGA Tour, the Korn Ferry Tour. Have a good one, buddy. Thanks for the shirt. I love it.
But Joe, before you go, how do you know professional golfers? Like, what are you? Is there a way I can learn more about the things that you do with professional golfers?
I mean, I'm kind of a networker. Some might say stalker. I don't know. It's whichever word you want to use. But I've got some really good friends that have just kind of met people along the way. And of course, my neighbor is Chris Nagel. He lives 8 houses down. So we love following that guy and watching him. But it's all about networking and speaking it into existence. I love professional golf. I want to be a professional golfer someday. We'll see if it happens. So, of course, my friends are out on tour.
Well, thank you so much, Trey. Always a pleasure catching up with you. Thank you for being a special correspondent. The
Absolutely.
people in the
Thanks
audience
for having me on.
Absolutely thrilled.
Listen, yeah.
Have a great day, buddy.
I can't.
He's gone. Welcome back, Benjamin. Thank you again for joining us. We left off with your travels in Eastern Europe. Tell me more about what that experience was like, seeing the team. Is this the first time you've seen them since the conflict began, or what was that looking like?
Well, the Everest team based in Chicago, we talk to all the time and see them all the time. But the Eastern European team, yes, getting to see some of the key people in person, having not been able to see them since almost a year ago, was great to see them. Very gratifying. It felt great, certainly for me. I hope for them. I know when you're going through hell, knowing you've got people on your side really matters. And I think I'd like to think that we've helped make their lives a little bit better by knowing that we've got their back and we're looking to help them, whether it was getting out or getting friends and family out, or making sure that there were supplies for them, or making sure housing, resources that they knew there were people looking out for them. So for me, it was emotional and it was intense. It was also emotional and intense because Krakow is an hour away from Auschwitz, and
really,
I'd never been to Auschwitz, and we went, and when you think about the most evil, depraved things that dictators can do and people full of hatred can do, seeing what the Nazis did and the 6 million Jews that they killed and millions of others that they killed, and seeing in Auschwitz really the museum documenting some of the worst crimes committed in the history of the human condition. Auschwitz-Birkenau, where 1.3 million people were massacred, over 1 million Jews massacred by the Nazis. It really highlights why when we say never again, what it means. And I certainly don't mean to imply that there's any moral equivalence between the Holocaust and another event. But certainly when you look at the massacre of the Ukrainians right now, you have to think never again means that we exist just for such a time as this, to stand up and do our best. And it's great to talk about business. It's great to make money. It's great to succeed from a career standpoint, but none of it matters if we can't use our capabilities to help and to make the world a better place. And seeing that made it real.
That parallel you draw is really worth spending a little bit of time on. The Holocaust was human extinction or human murder at an industrial scale. And it was the complete evisceration of cultures. I'd lost family members. My background is in Serbia and parts of Germany, and I did lose family members from the Serbian side in the Holocaust. And it's incredible to think that that was only a generation or two ago. And as you see what's happening in Ukraine, there are children being deported from the areas that Russia has occupied, bringing them back to Russia. And this, you call out is right. I mean, our job is to call out these injustices that we see, to reject being passive, to lead courageously, and to take responsibility. So what you're doing is awe-inspiring. But what can people do here at home to help with this cause? I mean, we have what Daniel threw up in the chat earlier, and I'll put that back up here. But what can we do as individuals that would kind of help the people of Ukraine?
Well, I think three things. The first is there's basic needs, and you can give money. You can give money through lots of organizations, JDC, Red Cross, ICRC, and a variety of other Ukraine-specific groups, or through us, the Ukraine Logistics Coalition. But giving money to meet basic needs, that's one. Two is as supply chain professionals, you and we can do something supply chain specific. What we're doing with the Ukraine Logistics Coalition is we are trying to create networks of free passage of transportation of goods. Mm-hmm. So we have companies on the trucking side that will truck freight, for example, to JFK, airlines and freight forwarders that will provide free air transport from JFK to Warsaw, trucking from Warsaw to the border of Ukraine, and then trucking for the last mile in. Okay. And as a result, what that means is if we can get more companies to donate medical supplies, once you get the medical supplies into the system, everything else happens, and it happens without any cost because of the donations of the wonderful organizations that are helping and working together. So you can help. If you're listening right now, if you're part of a transportation company, you can donate transportation capacity. B, if you're part of a food or medical supplies or other organization, or have access to people in those organizations that can donate much needed supplies. And we have a list on logisticscoalition.org of what some of those most pressing needs are. Again, medical supplies, number one, needles, syringes, medicines, etc. And then look, the third is you can go and volunteer. Some of our partners at Ukraine Logistics Coalition have gone to Ukraine or to the Polish-Ukrainian border and volunteered manual labor on unpacking and repacking goods in and out of warehouses and the transportation associated with that. You can do lots of things, but as the line says, we're not obligated to complete the task, but we're not free to desist from it. Yeah. Which is a biblical line from the sayings of the fathers. And my view is pick something, but don't do nothing.
My church has missionaries in Ukraine, and they've had a church there they've been planting, and we've done a lot. I think our church has raised like $60,000 over the course of a few months. But to your point, like there is something for everyone can be involved with. Now, I want to kind of transition to talk a little bit more about adversity generally. So you invest in this amazing company, Everest. These crazy things happen that are outside of your control. How do you handle the stress, the pressure of what you do every day? How do you deal with that?
Well, first of all, any stress or pressure that I feel is a tiny subset of the stress and pressure that the Everest management team feels and the Everest people on the ground in Ukraine and Poland feel. So I certainly, while I've had plenty of stress, it's a fraction of what they've had to do. But I'll tell you what I've done, and I'll tell you what our team's done, and I'll tell you what I've advised and encouraged. The first is focus on what you can control. So you can't do everything, but pick something, right? So as Daniel's flagging that,
absolutely,
and that's exactly right. So pick something. In the case of Everest, what can we do that we can control? We sure as hell can't control what Putin's going to do, but we can control making the business resilient. So we move some people to Krakow. We set up another office. We make sure that there's no risk of business interruption, no business discontinuity. Great, we could do that, number one. Number two, obviously, taking care of Maslow's hierarchy, the basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, and safety comes first. So make sure that's taken care of. And again, that was why we did what we did, back on around Feb 24, get people to safety, give them resources, supplies, et cetera. And then number 3 is remember that it's not all about you, and you've got people you can rely on that can help. In the case of Everest, you know what? A lot of customers have wanted to do more because they recognize that Everest is not only a fantastic company providing fantastic tech-enabled truck brokerage capabilities, terrific round-the-clock service with an outstanding track record, but guess what? They're also employing these fantastic Ukrainians and Ukrainian refugees. And so, look, if you're a major CPG, retail, food, or other brand, as a human, you want to do business with people that are good people. From a marketing standpoint, it's good for you to know that you're helping people in need in Ukraine, and that's something that's valuable. And people want to do that. People want to help. So I think the fact that there are people that want to do more with Everest and want to work with them more, that's great. By the way, Everest applying all that and much more, and again, all credit to the management team, to Jake and Phil and the outstanding leaders there. The business has just about doubled from when we first began our deal discussions with them, right? So which was, I guess, a year and 3 months ago, right? So all credit to them. They're doing a great job, and I expect that to continue. And certainly for people that are looking to work with folks do well and do good, I'd certainly encourage people that are watching, listening to reach out to Everest as well.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's look at when you've had to deal with personal adversity. Because what I find about so many people is that we all have different ways of coping with how we individually handle things. So for you, markets going up, markets going down, all these different external stresses, how do you manage the stress day to day? How do you deal with it?
Well, I think so much of what we all do is pattern recognition, right? So I have the benefit of having gone through the hell of 20 years ago running an internet company when the dot-com bust and the tech bust really made everything awfully difficult. So, let me tell you what I went through, what I did wrong, what I learned from it, and how it helps me now. So here's what I went through. Yeah. So 99, we start this company, Threeplex. We think we're brilliant. 99, early 2000, getting a lot of press, New York Times, Business Week, the Journal of Commerce. And we were viewed as these, disruptive, brilliant, internet whiz kids, in transportation. And of course, I think we believed a lot of that too. I don't think we realized how much of that was bullshit at the time. But it felt real. It felt real. And
Absolutely.
And so that was, as great as that felt. March 10th of 2000, the market peaked. From March 10th through year end, the NASDAQ would fall over 50%. You had toys.com, pets.com, lots of other flameouts. And the venture markets, which had been wide open until then, boom, they clamped shut. And we managed to raise a $15 million round in April. And then after that, we hit pretty much all of our metrics, and it didn't matter. And we ended up having to do a huge down round the next year. And we ended up having to lay off a lot of people. When you found a company, it's not just business, it is personal. You do feel your identity is wrapped up in the business. You feel loyalty to the people. There are just so many different layers to this. So having to fire people that are important to you and important to business, and it feels like you're severing parts of yourself too. And it's a horrible thing to go through. But guess what? We went through it. It sucked. We managed to come out on the other side and have an exit. Was it a great exit? No. But having an exit of any kind, 2002, sale to Maersk. 3 years later, that business would then sell to IBM. And so I learned a lot of things from this. The first was the humility of remembering that the highs are higher when you're an entrepreneur, but the lows are lower too. And so your goal is to try to maintain equanimity and not overreact. I think 2 is don't believe your own bullshit. Recognize that you might think you're the world's greatest fill in the blank, but you're probably not. And there are definitely other people that you can learn a lot from, and I think the humility to listen, learn, and observe other people's success. The third was decisions happen really fast when you're running a business, and especially when you're a first-time founder. Find ways to slow it down. I mean, where you want, if you're use a baseball analogy, I mean, if you turn a 100-mile-an-hour fastball into a 50-mile-an-hour fastball, you're just much more likely to hit the ball and succeed. How do you slow the pace down? One way you slow the pace down is you slow the burn rate down. Our burn rate, was $2 million a month in 2000, and this was I was 26 years old at the time. And did I know everything that I was doing at the time? No. Did I think I did? Of course. So I was wrong. But if our burn rate had been 200 grand a year instead of a month, rather, instead of 2 million, we would have had a lot more time to make mistakes, learn from them, pivot, and get better. And that's why, look, it's part of the advice that I give to our portfolio companies today, which is, it's not just that an investor wants you to spend less of their money. It's also that you make better decisions when you have more time. So this is a mind shift, because if you're an entrepreneur and you studied the last 5 years, it was all about speed. But right now, it's not about making faster moves. It's about making smarter moves. And so slow the pace down, burn less, make better decisions. And then the last thing that I would say is be open to the fact that what you're doing might be wrong, and be willing to pivot. And in our case with Replex, we started as a SaaS TMS, but we ended up starting this little drayage management system. Okay, we raised 28 million. We spent probably 27 of it doing things related to the TMS, less than $1 million on the drayage. But it turned out the drayage management system was something that Maersk really liked, and that's what ended up failed the business. So that's awesome. So it just goes to show that sometimes your answer might not be the right one. And if you slow down the pace, slow down the burn, look around for ideas, you may find that the better opportunities adjacent.
Oh, that's phenomenal. Well, we're getting close to the time. So for people who are in the comments, please ask some questions, and we'll pose them to Ben. And I'll start off, Ben. I have a question for you. In the news, you're on Twitter. I follow you on Twitter. I urge everybody who's watching, follow Ben at Twitter and Cambridge Capital as well. What about Musk, right? Like, so Elon Musk says, I'm gonna buy a company, and then he says, I don't want to buy a company, and then the company says, you're gonna buy me, and I'm gonna sue you in Delaware Chancery Court for specific performance. Do you have a crystal ball? What do you think's going to happen come October for that trial? What are you thinking? What are your thoughts?
Well, two things. First of all, props to Elon Musk for a lot of things, but one of them is he has shipped a lot of Starlink satellites to Ukraine, and actually, Ukraine Logistics Coalition has played a tiny role in some of that. But so there are a lot of crazy things that he's done, and a lot of things that are worth mocking. But one great thing that he's done is that Starlink Ukraine support. Secondly, as it relates to the immediate question at hand, you've got the law degree, and you have more legal insight as to what the Chancery Court of Delaware is going to do. But a couple of observations. One is, when you sign a merger agreement, it's pretty rare that you can just walk away from it for a routine due diligence issue, let alone something that you knew going in, right? I mean, you knew going in that there was lots of quote fake news, chatbots and spam on Twitter. This wasn't exactly a secret. So does that count as what the lawyers call a material adverse clause? MAC? I don't think so, because there's nothing different. So I think you're gonna have a hard time with that. And so 9 times out of 10, I would say that's a losing argument. The one thing that I think is in his favor, 2 things that are in his favor. I mean, one is that he could throw unlimited money against this, and so maybe he'll find a loophole. 2 is what happened earlier this week, the whistleblower account. So there was a whistleblower.
That's right.
Right. So maybe you followed this, and the whistleblower basically is alleging that Twitter failed to take action against these these fake accounts. So who knows? Sometimes a surprise like that can help. But
it's very rare that we get a chance to see like legal textbooks and business textbooks being written in real time. Now, we have a question from Jory. I'm going to read the question. Do you think agencies that specialize in providing dispatch services for fleets of vehicles are here for the long haul? And if so, do you think they are a good investment given a robust infrastructure? So dispatching companies as different than a freight brokerage business. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, look, a couple of things. I'm going to make a couple of assumptions here. So dispatch services for fleets of vehicles. So part of this is, am I operating a private fleet? Like I'm Walmart and I've got my private fleet of trucks, and I've got a dispatch function to manage that. Do you think that's what Jory's asking about?
I think what Jory's asking is like the dispatching companies where the broker calls and says, okay, you, Mr. Dispatch Company, you know the drivers. I'm going to use you as a coordinator for all of these activities. So they're kind of a transportation intermediary, but they're not necessarily brokering the deals themselves.
Got it. So knowing that 4 questions have come in the last minute.
Yeah, we got a lot of them.
This and go. There are people that would say that the internet is going to automate everything transactional and freight, and that will all be one big digital brokerage process. I'm not one of those people. I don't believe that. I think there will always be a role. People have been predicting that the internet would, quote, disintermediate the middleman. Well, actually, since I was running Threeplex 23 years ago. And I don't believe that. I do, however, believe that people who are doing dispatch will have to automate more in order to do a better job. And they'll end up having to function with lower margin and more automation in order to succeed. So are they a good investment? Maybe, but only if they're well positioned to make those kinds of moves.
Absolutely. We're about to do like a separate thing with just the questions, but Daniel has a question here. Can you speak a little bit angel versus VC and perhaps plug refashioned ventures?
Yes. Okay. So VC historically was a small number of the elite venture capitalists, originally in Boston, starting in 1946, and then eventually moving to San Francisco, or more precisely Silicon Valley and Sand Hill Road. And VC, really up until 20 years ago, was almost entirely about the small number of Boston and San Francisco-based venture investors that were almost like the gatekeepers for whether you could get capital as an early-stage tech company. And that was certainly the case when I was building my first startup, Threeplex. But a lot's changed since then. Number one, we've seen the democratization of VC. So now you have investors in places like Austin, or in our case, West Palm Beach, or lots of other places across the world. Secondly, you also have more sophisticated angel investors who are banding together to provide capital, particularly for early stage companies. So I think if you are an entrepreneur with a great idea and you're too early and you haven't validated it yet with customers and built a product and you're not generating revenue yet, you're probably going to get angel money or friends and family money first. And then you're going to get venture money later. The interesting thing is there are also groups that are trying to bifurcate the difference between the early stage angel guys and then the large kind of traditional venture guy like the Kleiner Perkins of the world writing $10 to $30 million checks. But what if you're somewhere in between? And that's where somebody like a Refashioned comes in, and Refashioned is doing early stage venture investing, writing small checks, specializing in supply chain and getting involved. We love those guys. I was the first LP on a personal level.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, love what Brian and Lisa are doing. So my view is we invest in companies that are 5 to 30 million of revenue or 5 to 30 million of EBITDA, but great businesses that are smaller, earlier stage, should go find an early stage VC or somebody that fits in that ecosystem.
We'll have time for one last question. Here it is from Robert Barr. Ben, do you deal with carve-outs at all? If so, what are your top 3 things you feel are tied to a successful carve-out? Or what do you think look for when it results in a successful carve-out?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, Robert, I'm glad you asked. And we love carve-outs. The reason why is, Jack Welch used to have a great line. He said, you should outsource because your back office is somebody else's front office. And that's pretty good reason why the logistics industry exists the way it does. Because if you were a guy doing logistics at a Fortune 500 company 30, 40 years ago, you probably were not the most important guy in the company. You probably didn't get a lot of love, attention, recognition, support, probably not as well rewarded, financially or otherwise. But if you left and then you went and started a 3PL, more likely in the 90s or thereafter, when this whole 3PL wave really took off. A, you built a business that you owned. B, you were the specialist and the expert. And C, you could then go contract to that same Fortune 500 company. And ironically, they'd probably pay you a lot more outside the organization than inside the organization. So what it comes down to is your back office is somebody else's front office. So that's why I love carve-outs, because oftentimes a carve-out means you can go buy a business from a larger corporate parent, and you might have great people and it might be a great business, but it's just lost. It's not the main event for that parent, and it becomes more valuable when it comes out. Here's an example. Caterpillar spun out Cat Logistics, and it became much more successful when it came out. Usco Logistics, which ultimately sold to Kuehne + Nagel, same thing. It started inside a Fortune 500 and came out. So we love them. And if you are looking at, or if you're part of a conglomerate and you're working in a division, and that division is maybe an unloved orphan of something bigger, we love looking at those kinds of deals and backing those kinds of people.
Oh, man. All right. Ben, I have enjoyed having the conversation with you. I have found your experience and your depth of knowledge in this space just to be absolutely phenomenal. So I want to thank you again for making time to come on the program. Where can people find you? Where's the best place for them to learn more about you and learn more about the companies you're working with?
Yeah, so first of all, by all means, Cambridge Capital, cambridgecapital.com for our private equity investing, BGSA.com for our investment bank. Twitter, my handle is Benjamin H. Gordon. LinkedIn, pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. I think it's Ben Gordon 18. I suppose I should know that, but I don't look at it very often. Daniel's posting the Twitter. Thank you. And listen, I'm accessible. I'm always happy to exchange ideas with folks. I know we're all busy guys, but I make an effort to be accessible, because I know that some of the best ideas I've gotten have come from people that I've met, well, like you, through LinkedIn or Twitter or otherwise. So I see Daniel's also flagged BGSA Index. We do put out an index every month that gives you kind of a snapshot of what's happening in the industry. If you go to bgsa.com, you go to the bottom of the page, there's an opportunity to link to subscribe, and you'll get that monthly snapshot. And it gives you data and commentary about what's happening in the space, and certainly happy to share that too.
Well, thank you so much, Ben. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm going to let you go and say a couple last final words, but thank you again for making the time. It has been an absolute pleasure getting to know you a little bit better, learning about your story and all the work that you're doing in Ukraine. So thank you for all your help today, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Great to be with you, Matthew. Great to be with your audience. Love what you're doing, and I appreciate your sharing the work that we're really trying to get more attention and support for on the Ukraine front, the Ukraine Logistics Coalition, to do more to help. And of course, couldn't do this without our partners, the great people at BGSA, Cambridge Capital, and at the 7 soon-to-be 8 portfolio companies that we work with. So, and looking forward to adding more and continue to work with more great people here in supply chain.
Thank you so much, sir. Well, everybody, we're wrapping up. You heard the great announcement of Redacted Company, who's now joining up with Ben. We'll learn all about that wonderful redacted business in the near future. As always, thank you for letting me have a little bit of your time and a little bit of your attention as we talk about really interesting things in supply chain. Next week, we're joined by Blythe Brumleve. Oh, that's going to be fun. We have a little bit of a disagreement as to what's better, Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings and the new iterations. We will talk about that probably exclusively, maybe not. But anyway, we are going to wrap up the rest of the program. So thank you, as always, for joining us. If you found this interesting, you can find it on Apple Podcasts and in Spotify in a couple of days, probably, maybe sooner. We'll see. As always, thank you for joining, and I'm going to hit the button that makes everything stop.